We're a week and a half into August and we're getting close to September. We have about 3 weeks before school starts. And I'm really concerned that we don't have a plan for a safe September. So I'm looking forward to our government investing some funds and creating a real plan that will keep our education workers and our students safe when we go back to school.
We want our kids to go back to school, especially kids, for mental health reasons. They've been away from their friends and from familiarity for at least 6 months. But returning to school in September is not going to look like the school they left in March. For instance, with the way the cohorts are being set up right now, children will be in the classroom all day with very little breaks, with very little interaction with their peers. There's not going to be any singing inside the classroom anymore. There's barely going to be a reading circle. Anything that they would have been familiar with before September is going to be gone. They're going to be looking at adults in masks. They're going to be separated from any touch or interaction, which might end up being more detrimental than staying home is right now.
There's a lot of unknowns, and that causes a lot of anxiety. People don't know what to expect necessarily, not necessarily from the processes, but what to expect from the outcomes of the processes that we're going to be using for in-class learning.
With the current plan, I don't think anyone should be sending their kids back to school, at least full-time and in person, because it's unsafe. The government has not invested enough money, enough time. They have not done enough consultations with the people that actually have a stakeholder in education, and therefore it's not safe.
I think it's a little bit too early. There are a lot of unknowns right now, and I think that's what's causing the most anxiety. If we're not sure and we're sending a massive amount of students back to school, then the possibility for even the spark of a second wave is very high. We don't know what the results will be at the end of this. I think it would be better to go back to school when we're more sure-footed about how things will proceed and the effectiveness of the things that will be proceeding.
I have a son who's going into grade 3, and I will not be sending him back. He will be doing online learning full-time because I'm just worried about his safety. I'm worried about the fact that as an elementary age child, he's going to go back into a classroom with at least 30 kids.
I have 2 kids. I have a son who's in university and all his classes are going to be online. And then I have a daughter who's going into grade 8, so she's in the TDSB. And at this moment, we haven't actually decided what we're going to do with her. I really want her to go back, and certainly that's the way I'm leaning. But I'm interested to hear how the plans evolve, and I would really like to see much smaller cohorts, 15 or under, and then I would feel a lot better sending her back.
I'm definitely afraid of getting COVID. My son is also immunocompromised. My partner is immunocompromised. I have parents who are immunocompromised. So not only am I worried about myself getting sick, but I'm also worried about them.
I'm type 1 diabetic, which means I require insulin, and my immune system is compromised, which means that if I happen to get the virus, there's a large chance that I don't handle it as well as other people would, and it's essentially risking my life to go back to school, to go back to in-person learning.
As we're getting closer to September, my anxiety is increasing. And when I thought we would have smaller groups and be able to do some distancing and more outdoor classrooms, I was feeling pretty hopeful. But given that the government hasn't moved on any of these recommendations, I am getting increasingly worried.
For me to feel safer, the biggest issue is class sizes. If we would invest in smaller class sizes, at least 15 per class, and also less teacher contact with these 15 kids, that's one major safety precaution that would make me feel better.
I definitely think we need small cohorts, 10 or 15 students with a teacher. I think we need a real investment in outdoor learning, and I would certainly be in favor of using alternate spaces around the city, closing off streets and things like that. I think we should have PPE for all the teachers, education workers, and people in the schools. I definitely feel that the kids should have masks on. And the other things I really feel we need to see are sort of broader social safety net things. So I need to see that parents can have paid sick days so that they can keep their kids home if they're sick or showing symptoms. and they need to have food security and housing security, because one of our real concerns as educators is that kids will end up at school because there's nowhere else for them to be, because their parents are in essential service workers and they can't stay home with them. So I would really like to see the Ford government broaden what it considers school safety measures to include those sorts of things.
Experts have reinforced time and time again, smaller class sizes are important. They've also reinforced the issue of wearing masks. If you think about when we go to the grocery store, when we go to do anything else, it's mandatory for everyone to wear a mask. Why is it all of a sudden not mandatory to wear a mask in school?
We should be following health protocols provided by the health experts. That's why they're the experts. The fact that there are suggestions that perhaps maybe a delayed start would be effective, some things along those lines, and that we're not actually considering those, it greatly concerns me.
I'm not feeling confident in the government's plan at all. I think it varies greatly from the recommendations of public health and even sick kids. The fact that they have really large class sizes and that's not being recommended by the health experts. I'm also really concerned that this is undermining public education. I think Lecce and Ford don't have a strong ideological investment in that, and they're taking this as an opportunity to weaken our public education system. And I think we need to, education workers and parents, we really need to speak up and say that we need safety for our students in the fall, but we also really need a strong public education system for all of the students in Ontario.
The way this plan is being played out, all of the people who are most vulnerable will be the ones who are affected. So persons who are in low-income homes, who are more likely to have more persons in their households, who are more likely to need to send their children to school so that they can go back to work, who are more likely essential workers, persons who are single parents, persons who are, again, immunocompromised. Very little considerations have been made for them. And when it comes to, again, cohorting, rotating days, people who work full-time are not going to be able to commit to something like that. They're going to also have to send their kids to other childcare, which widens the exposure that they're going to have when they come back to school, whichever day they do come back to school in their rotation cycle.
For anyone who is, like myself, immunocompromised, you're still at a huge risk if you're going into classes, because you run the risk of potentially getting the virus, whereas during remote learning there's no risk. There's no one that you can get the virus from, at least in class, in schools, whereas if you have someone who is already, like I was mentioning, immunocompromised, they are potentially fearing for their life every time they walk into a school. It also affects the students, and then the parents at home. Anyone who lives with anyone that's vulnerable for one reason or another, whether it's age, whether it's immunocompromisation, whatever the reason may be, going back to school could potentially mean death for an individual.
I'm definitely concerned that parents will be pulling their kids from the system because it's already happening. We're already seeing, especially in more affluent areas, persons are setting up pods, as they call them, or mini schools, where they're actually hiring people to come to their house and teach in a bubble of 5 kids. And the more people that do that, the less money that will be in the system based on enrollment. And that's actually going to make matters worse.
When those people leave public education, it really doesn't support it then for the kids who need it, whose families don't have that luxury, who don't have the income. And so that weakens the public education system. And I think those parents who have the resources to do that should think really carefully about their support for public education and fight for that for all students in Ontario, rather than just keeping their own kids at home because they can do it.
If we were to push back the start date, it might make people feel more comfortable, which might make them feel more likely to enroll as a whole. And I think that would be the most effective method right now.
So class sizes in the adult school, just for context, we do not have class size caps. What that means is, whereas in the high school or the elementary school, we have a certain number that we can't go above, that does not exist in the adult school system. So I've actually had classes of up to 50 students at a time in rooms that were really built for at least 30. Now, we have not gotten on paper a definitive class size for adult schools when we return. We are only being told that it should follow the secondary model, which, if my memory serves, should be 15 right now per class, but we haven't had anything definitive.
So in grades 4 to 8, for example, we have an average of 24.5, but because we have some classes that are much smaller, special ed classes or ESL, the actual number of classes is often into the mid-30s, which is common in my experience. And if people keep their kids home, I don't think that it's going to actually make the class sizes smaller. I think what they will do is put kids together in classes, like collapsed classes, so that the teachers who are not in school will be teaching those kids remotely, and there are going to be fewer teachers in school. So I think that the class sizes are actually going to remain large, and parents might not think that, because I think there was an idea that if you get your kids home, you're leaving the classes available to those kids who can't stay home, but I think that's actually not how it's going to work.
There's no way to plan for the imminent danger of your kids and for yourself. There's no way to plan for sending your child back into a classroom with 30 children who might be already carrying the virus, to bring it home to you and your family, and also the other points of contact that you will come across in your day-to-day activities. So for us to plan, we need to put pressure on the government for them to do what they're supposed to do.
If we actually educate the students on how to go about returning to school, that could be the best and most effective way to go about this whole thing. So teaching them, make sure you wash your hands when you're if you've interacted with anyone, or if you've gone into class, make sure maybe keep sanitizer on you, wear your mask at all times, stuff like that. And just, I think, explaining why to a lot of students, particularly in the elementary grades, is very important, because they will know exactly why they're doing what they're doing, as opposed to it just being something they should do.
I think at this moment we really need parents and teachers to be political activists. I think we need to be calling on Ford and Lecce and the people who influence Ford and Lecce to actually invest money in making September safe. And I think some school boards, like the TDSB, have actually done some good things in calling on them to invest more money, but we need to have our voices heard loud and clear that money needs to be invested, and that's what's going to change things, and there's no way we can make the changes we need unless we have that money. So really that's what people need to do now, is call on them to increase the funding.
People are planning wills. They're actually speaking with lawyers, and companies have actually offered free consultation for preparing a will, because people feel like the only obvious reality that's going to happen is they're going to get sick and they're going to die and they're going to leave their families behind. Other more creative things people are doing are combining face shields with medical masks to create a sort of mini hazmat suit, if you will. People are considering using shower curtains to partition their classrooms, but again, all of this would be out of the pockets of educators, which is, it's not right.
I've seen some cool things like developing new games, developing maybe interactive systems. So if someone doesn't understand something, you can, like red light, green light, yellow light, using that in a different way. There are definitely some, I think that might be one of the coolest things we see coming out of this, is creative options that teachers use inside the classroom to help navigate these kind of unknown waters.
I would encourage parents to become involved in advocacy between now and September, and I know the Ontario Parent Action Network, for example, is a great organization that's doing some really creative things in calling on Ford and Lecce to increase funding and letting them know what it's really like in a classroom. I know there are some teachers who are thinking of creative solutions for Safe September, outdoor education, for example. I know that there are schools who are blocking off parts of their schoolyard for outdoor classes, maybe looking at local parks, that sort of thing. I know that I've been talking with my colleagues about how we can rearrange scheduling and use some of the Rotary teachers in different ways so that we can organize kids differently and hopefully in smaller groups. And I think teachers have a lot of really creative ideas like that. What I would say, though, is that it shouldn't be on the teachers to creatively make September safe. I think the people who are in charge, the school board and the Minister of Education, need to put the money in and the time to think of a plan that's reasonable, because they're the ones who are supposed to be in charge of education. And I think teachers are great creative people, and we will do it because that's what we do. But we shouldn't be the ones who are in charge of coming up with a plan.